Church because it is summer. And you see that through the activities happening at camp. Incredible things happening there. A lot of lives impacted. Love camp. A big welcome to each of you that has joined us here within the sanctuary itself. And a big welcome to those who are joining us from the RTC Center with the families. And also a big welcome to those who are joining us online, wherever summer may have taken you. We appreciate you spending your time with us. Our lead pastor, Stefan, is currently on study break for another couple of weeks, and then he'll be back. But a big hello to Stefan and Louise, who I know are joining us online. We miss him, but we also recognize the importance of what he's doing while he's away. Next week, Pastor Martin will be back. He's off at camp this week, but he'll be back and he'll finish up the series, part 3 of Loneliness. I want to start this morning by sharing a shocking fact with you. It's going to be probably more shocking to those on this side of the room than on this side. I grew up with no screens. Can you imagine that? No screens. In fact, we didn't even have a television when I was growing up. So we grew up in the country. I was in a construction family, but we had devices. They were like a hammer, a saw, screwdriver, wrenches, and we learned how to fix and repair things. We broke a lot of things, and so that gave us a lot of practice. Not all my attempts were successful. Mom, I know you're in here somewhere. Sorry about the electric kettle. It only leaked a little bit after. I attempted to fix it and get all the, what they call Schädelstein out of the kettle. Didn't work too well, but I got better with time. As we were growing up, our kids would be familiar with something that we called a fix-it drawer. If something broke, you shoved it in the drawer, and Dad would get around to fixing it. Mostly. I recall there's a VHS tape that we found in there. Now, who knows what a VHS tape is? All right, most of you do. I thought there might be a bunch that may not. It was supposed to be repaired. By the time I got to it, technology had changed such that it was no longer required. So that I wasn't always equally successful in fixing things. Speaking of repairs, last year we got a recall notice on one of our vehicles. A recall notice, you know what that means? It's warranty. That means it doesn't cost you anything. It means that when you go to pick up the vehicle, they've washed it and vacuumed it. It's awesome. It's like a win-win. Now, I dropped off the vehicle and went to go pick it up. Now, I know that my vehicle isn't new. I mean, it's far from new, and it's got a lot of miles, but it was still okay. The service advisor indicated that they had done the warranty work, and so that was all good to go. But they'd also gone the extra mile, and while it was up on the hoist, they figured they would check it out to see what else it might possibly need. And then he handed me a list of the repairs that he felt were required. Well, that cost a lot more than I felt the vehicle was worth. So here's my question. How did this happen? How did the car suddenly fall apart? We'd been perfectly happy with the car up to this point. It started, it ran, it stopped. It drove, it heated, it cooled. Sure, it clunked and made some noises, but that's normal, right? We were okay with it. We didn't know that there were any big underlying issues that we needed to address, and some of them even safety issues. Unfortunately, it seems that this situation isn't just limited to my vehicles. You know, it's interesting how winters work around our house, and yours might be the same. But you spend the winter thinking of all the things that you need to fix come spring. It's pretty safe because spring is a long way off, and so you can make a pretty aggressive list. Because you know the things that are broken, they're the things that you were hoping snow would come quickly and cover, so you wouldn't have to deal with those things. I had a deck like that, 3 years in a row, it was on the list. But stuff breaks. And stuff keeps wearing out. So there's painting, there's flooring, there's windows to be replaced, there's shingles, there's eaves troughs to clean. And like I said, decks that wear out and get rotten. Oh, and then there's flower beds that need weeding, trees that need trimming, grass that needs mowing. And then you need to fertilize it and water it more so you can mow it again. And then I have appliances that occasionally need fixing, but they only need fixing after the warranty is done. Interesting how that works. You know, just the other day, we were heading off to a soccer game, and we have an upright freezer in the garage, and it has a temperature on the outside so you know that it's holding its temperature. Well, it was at minus 10. If you know freezer temperature, it should be at least at minus 18. So we ran out to the soccer game, came back. Now it was at minus 8. Well, alarm bells went off, and I thought, well, you know, the freezer is 15 years old. There's no sense spending money on a repairman to come fix it. So I expedited the decision, got a new freezer, threw everything into it, and then cleaned out the old one, and noticed that actually just the bottom weather stripping on the door had come loose. Could have saved myself $1,600. So thank you, Martin. Pastor Martin now has it in his garage. He says it's doing fabulously. And then, of course, some people tell me that you should always keep the old appliances because they last forever. It's the new ones that break, so his will probably outlast me. Stuff breaks. We all know that the things that we have require a lot of maintenance, and we have to be diligent to stay on top of things so that they'll keep functioning and working well. And in every situation, like in mine, we keep assessing, is it worth spending the money on repair? Does it have value that's worth the effort? Because you don't want to let something go to ruin that has value, and you don't want to spend money into something that has no value. Often we'd like to just ignore it. Like on my car, I'm hoping that the noise that I'm hearing, that'll just go away by itself. Hasn't happened yet. I guess that's like going camping and then seeing a bear coming and assuming that if you cover your head with a blanket, the bear's no longer there. I'm guessing that wouldn't end well. So for those of you who are camping, don't try that approach. There are words that we use to describe the habit of not dealing with things. It can be called procrastination. It can be called lazy, but it can also be called neglect. We're going to look at a passage this morning that talks about this very issue, not about the bear, but it does talk about something called neglect. So let's look at Proverbs 24, verses 30 to 34. I walked by the field of a lazy person, the vineyard of one with no common sense. I saw that it was overgrown with nettles, it was covered with weeds, and its walls were broken down. Then as I looked and I thought about it, I learned this lesson. A little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, then poverty will pounce on you like a bandit, and scarcity will attack you like an armed robber. It's important to know that Proverbs is not a book about absolute promises, but what it does do is point to general truths or principles for life. And so what Proverbs is saying is that generally speaking, you'll be better off if you work hard than if you don't. And the writer's painting a mental picture of something that speaks louder than words. He's using an illustration of a vineyard that's been left to ruin. His purpose is not to educate us on the agricultural practices of tending a vineyard. He wants to use this picture to teach us something that's important for us to understand. He's giving us a life lesson. Let's summarize what we know. While the owner of the vineyard had something of incredible value, a lot of time and investment had gone into making it productive and then building walls around it to protect it. Did you know that establishing a vineyard can cost you $50,000 per acre, excluding the land? That's a lot of investment. And break even typically doesn't happen for the first 7 to 10 years. Stats say that over the last 120 years, return on investment for vineyards, however, has equaled 8.5%. The investment is made because the vineyard are assets that are intended to produce an income for the long term. A vineyard represents an opportunity to do something with something valuable, but it does require careful management. The owner is also called lazy and described as someone who has no common sense. We use the word lazy to describe someone who avoids tasks or responsibilities. They show a lack of motivation or effort. However, we're making a judgment call when we call someone lazy. It's important to recognize that some who appear lazy may actually be fatigued, overwhelmed, discouraged, or just lacking direction and support. And then, of course, there's those who just couldn't be bothered to put in the effort that's required. From the outside looking in, they could both look the same. The writer of this proverb has determined that the vineyard owner has simply chosen to no longer put in the effort required to take care of his responsibilities. And now when it says he has no common sense, it means he's not acting in a manner that most people would say is reasonable to act. For example, we know that it's common sense not to touch a hot stove. And we know that it's common sense to put the milk back in the fridge after you've used it and not leave it out on the counter where it turns into cottage cheese. Don't ask me how I know that. It's common sense not to go up to an angry dog and try to pet it. Common sense is the wisdom that we've derived by looking at how things work and how things don't work. So common sense in this case would be that if you have a vineyard, the expectation is that you ought to put in whatever effort is necessary to take care of it. Now the vineyard is overgrown with nettles and covered with weeds. If you're not familiar with nettles, they're not friendly plants. They're invasive. They're sharp. They leave stinging burns and rashes. They're nasty. And then there's weeds. I prefer to call weeds the miracle plant. They don't need to be planted. They just show up and take over. Simply do nothing, and there they are. Magic. We spend time in spring fertilizing and watering, caring for the plants and waters around a yard. It seems it takes a lot of effort to keep them alive and flourishing. The point is this: the stuff that we want to grow takes way more effort to grow than weeds. Weeds don't need effort. They just pop up everywhere without invitation. They survive in drought, in floods. It's the only thing that remains green, no matter what the weather, and you can't kill them without consistent, diligent effort. Weeds are kind of like our human nature. Paul talks about this in Romans 5:12. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world, and Adam's sin brought death. So death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. A sin nature doesn't need to be nurtured either. It's there, just like weeds, waiting. So simply do nothing, and it will spread. If we're not intentionally and consistently cultivating godly habits, like prayer, time in the Word, and growing in character, then something else will spread across our yard just like weeds. Things like compromise, apathy, bitterness, distractions, or bad habits will take over a heart that's not being actively tended. And reaching a state of being overgrown doesn't just happen overnight. We also see that the walls of this vineyard are broken down. Now, we build walls when we think we have something of value to protect. It keeps out things that shouldn't be in, like animals, people. But we also know that broken walls are not much better than no walls at all. Growing up in southern Manitoba and being familiar with beef cattle, I know that you can have miles and miles of really good fencing. In fact, it can be 99% really good with one broken piece. They all find that broken piece quickly. A broken fence is as good as no fence. You know, Angie and I thought we would plant a garden, and we thought we'd have garden boxes because it's nice. They're about this high, and we planted stuff in there. It grew. It was nice and green. We thought this was awesome, and so did the deer. They walked by. You know, they didn't have to bend their heads to eat. They just kind of grazed as they walked through. No walls is as good as no walls, is as good as no garden. We no longer have a garden. But there's a word used to describe a vineyard that's overgrown with weeds and surrounded by broken walls. It's called neglect. You might wonder what it is. Well, the definition is neglect is the failure to provide necessary care, attention, or support to someone or something for which one is responsible. It can be intentional, it can be unintentional, but it often leads to harm. It also implies that I have a duty to care for everything that I have been given, and that's a stewardship responsibility that I have to God for them. You know, in this story, it's easy to think, well, it's this guy's vineyard. Let him do what he wants with it. If it falls apart, so be it. And we tend to think that way of our lives also, that they're our lives to live any way we choose. And that would not be true. We are indeed given a lot of freedom with our lives, but you and I were also created for a purpose. And that purpose includes working and taking care of our responsibilities. And in this case, an overgrown vineyard was a sign of moral failure to fulfill God's expectations. After man was created, the immediate next thing God did was to give him something to do. We see that in Genesis 2. God created the man, gave him life, and then in verse 15 it says, "The Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it." We were not created to do nothing. We are created to look after all that God has given us, wherever he places us. We find that also illustrated in the parable of the talents, and you see that in Matthew 25 and in Luke 19. It's a very familiar parable which talks about a master going away for a while and leaving his servants in charge. Some he gave much, some he gave little. But they all had the responsibility to do something with what they had been given. So what's your vineyard? What's my vineyard? What do we have that's valuable that God has entrusted to us? Is it the stuff we have? Is it our health? Is it our relationships? Is it opportunities that we've been given? Is it positions of power and influence? Or perhaps it's something else. What have you been given? The questions I ask myself are, am I putting in the time and effort required to get the best out of them? Are there areas of my life that are just okay? Because I'm not prepared to put in the effort that's required to make them the best that they can be. God has placed me in my vineyard, and he surrounded me with things and relationships. And then he asked me to tend and to watch over them until I see him again. When someone walks by the vineyard of my life, I wonder what they see. Is it well tended and cared for, or has it fallen into disrepair? Has it been neglected? Now, I love going for drives. And often I go for drives and I drive by old abandoned houses. And they're falling apart, and I'm left wondering, how did it get to that state? Some of the ones that you look at look like they were once very ornate, very fancy. Someone obviously spent a lot of time and effort into building this house. It was a point of pride. It created an environment for families, friends. And I wonder what stories could be told in terms of what happened within that house. But at some point, it began to change from being an object of pride and has now become what we see today, a broken down structure, dark empty, no life, except maybe for the birds flying in and out of the empty windows. Over time, something happened. Did they notice? Was it unintentional? But something caused it to no longer be maintained and valued for the purpose for which it was built. It was neglected, eventually became empty, and is now what we see today. So how does this happen in our life? How do we move from good to ruin? I've thought about this. How do people get to this point? How do I get to this point? Let's look at one of the contributing factors, and I call it the drift. Hebrews 2 talks about it. It says we must pay close attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. It's a biblical truth, yes, about adhering to the truth of Scripture, but it's also a truth that we can apply to other areas of our life. Oxford Dictionary describes drifting as a continuous slow movement from one place to another. No fireworks, no big announcement. Something that was once here, now no longer is. It's moved, almost invisibly. Life is a current that is always taking us somewhere. And in the same way, neglect happens slowly, almost invisibly. It's what happens when we stop paying attention to the things that matter. A little deferred maintenance, no longer fixing things that need fixing, or taking shortcuts, using the zip ties and duct tape approach instead of fixing them properly. This is why the slow drift of neglect is so dangerous. And it can happen in a lot of areas. It can be a slow drift from taking care of your physical health. It can be a slow drift into unhealthy habits. It can be a slow drift away from spending time in the Word and in prayer. A slow drift from putting time and effort into your relationship with your spouse, family, friends. Every single area will deteriorate if they're not maintained regularly and intentionally. I have found this to be personally convicting. Ange and I have a great relationship. But we've been talking about this very fact, that we know that if we're not careful, if we're not paying attention to our relationship, it will begin to drift. You see the image of the old couple here on the screen? And she's saying, "How come you never say you love me?" And he says, "Well, I told you once, and I'll let you know if things change." Communication is important. Evaluate and communicate lots. Do we have any markers that let us know if things are drifting? What is the standard that we try to measure up against? And who is holding us accountable? In the case of my car, it was a mechanic's inspection that kept me accountable. But how do we assess our marriage? Do we have conversations with our spouse to talk about where we are versus where we'd like to be? To talk about what things are needed, and then consider what steps we need to take to get there. Are there health indications that let us know we need to do something about our health? What about our relationship with God? Do we spend time with Him, asking Him what it is that He would like to see? A great starting point is to be in the Word and find out how our life lines up with the expectations that He's already given us. All of life requires that we continually evaluate and make adjustments if we want to be intentional about setting the direction of our lives. Otherwise, we're simply drifting. I've also wondered, why is it so easy to neglect something or someone? What's our motivation? One of the first things I realize is drifting's easy because there's no immediate consequences. For example, I can skip exercising for a day, a few times, nothing changes. I feel the same way, I look the same way. So maybe I can skip for a month maybe 6 months. I can eat junk food, and I still mostly feel okay. I could go past the recommended oil change on my car. It still drives, it still starts. So maybe oil changes are overrated. Maybe they're not necessary at all. I can skip having devos and prayer. I can do that for a day, maybe skip a week, maybe skip a month. I still haven't lost my faith, so is it really necessary? I can take my relationships for granted. I can become self-focused and ignore the need for intentional conversations with my family, my spouse, my friends, and it doesn't feel like much has changed. The vineyard in this proverb also didn't change overnight, but little by little. Verse 33 said, a little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and slowly but surely things decayed and eventually fell apart. Another reason, we tend to be ruled by feelings, and putting effort into things is hard work. It takes commitment, it takes consistency. It also requires action over feelings. My dad once gave me some marriage advice about feelings. He said, there may come a time in your marriage when you don't feel as in love as you once did. And when that happens, you need to become intentional about doing the things that you would do if you felt that you were in love. Keep doing it, and eventually your emotions will allow you to feel it. Many times we have to do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do, regardless of how we feel about it. There have been times in my life where I didn't feel like doing my devotions, like spending time in the Word. But you know what? As I was waiting to feel like it, I began to feel less like it. Yet if I disciplined myself to do it anyway and do it consistently, I began to feel like it more, and my hunger grew. There have been times in my life where I didn't feel like being selfless. I didn't feel like investing in relationships. I didn't feel like fixing what was broken. But it's freeing to know that I can change the way I feel. If I do the right things, regardless of how I feel in the moment, I can lead my emotions through my actions. Another reason is that we may have low expectations as to what could be possible. Jim Collins in the book Good to Great said, good is the enemy of great. That is one of the key reasons why we have so little that becomes great. Few people attain great lives in a large part because it is just so easy to settle for a good life. Even though we might recognize that things are not as they ought to be, we can rationalize that, well, at least it's still functional, and we can easily find people in our lives who are in a worse position than us. It's good enough. But we'll never get great results by putting in minimum effort. Look at the things in our lives that are good, and let's begin to imagine what it would look like if they were fantastic. We can also be caught up in hopelessness, that the gap is just too big between where we are right now and where we'd like to be. You know, when I was growing up, Dad was in construction, and us kids, we went along with Dad to work in the summertime. And I was probably about 11 or 12 years old, and he was doing basement floors. And so that requires that you shovel gravel into this small hole in the side of the basement, and before you can cement the floor. So that was my job for the day. I was looking at this massive pile of gravel that the dump truck had left there, and I'm looking at this little hole, and I'm looking at this little spade. Hopeless, right? I thought so as a 11 or 12-year-old. But I began to shovel, one shovel at a time. By coffee break, I could see I'd made a little dent in the pile. By lunchtime, I had made pretty good progress. By the end of the day, I was done. Little by little. It requires consistency. It requires persistence. What could this look like a year from today? And at times, we actually don't know where to start. Some projects that I've started have been like that, where it's just too overwhelming. There's so many possible areas to start, and I can stand and look at it for a long time and actually not do anything because I don't know where to start. But then I talk to someone, and they begin to give me some direction, a point of reference, and then I can begin to get going. So if that's where you're at, take it to God in prayer, talk to someone, talk to Pastor Martin, get some insights from people that are not involved in the situation. What if today we started fixing what's been neglected and begin the process of repairing? It will never happen unless we start. We each get one shot at life, and we know that we can't go back and redoing anything that's in our past, but we have today, we have tomorrow, and maybe the next day. And we can wake up each day and put intentionality and effort into the things He has given us responsibility for. The proverb of the vineyard is a warning about what it looks like if we don't put in the necessary effort into dealing with our responsibilities. And the end result is that things that were once productive will stand neglected and unfruitful. It's interesting to hear about vineyards and nettles and weeds. And I know that's inspired some of you to run back and tend to your flower gardens. But let's consider a few questions before we leave. What are some areas of our lives that used to be healthy and awesome and have now, like the vineyard in the Proverbs, become neglected and are in need of repair? One of the things I know from observing my flower gardens is that if I'm in them often, tending to them, it's never a lot of work. But if I neglect them, it becomes a lot of work quickly. So in which areas are weeds beginning to take over? In our habits, our health, marriage, relationships, use of our time, attitudes? And are we giving the best that we can? Neglect doesn't happen overnight. It happens when we consistently ignore our responsibilities. Every day, we're taking steps towards some destination. It might still be okay today, but where are we heading? Are we heading towards restoring or repairing what we have? Or are we heading towards neglect? Are we drifting? We get to choose. But don't wait until things are so neglected that they're no longer worth repairing. Neglect comes at a great cost. What price are you prepared to pay? A couple of challenge questions I'd like you to take with you. These are action steps. What will you do? What is one area in which you know you need to make a change? What is one thing you will do differently? When will you start? Good intentions aren't good enough. When will you start? And who will hold you accountable? It's one thing to have lots of ideas. As soon as you tell someone else, you will be held accountable. Embrace the power of small steps. Zechariah 4:10 says, "Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin." I'll leave you with Ephesians 5:15 to 16. "So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity,